Everybody, day 2 free agency. Ethan Greenberg, Eric Allen, One Jets Live here at One Jets Drive. I don't know about
Day 2 of the negotiating period.
Okay, first of all,
started.
it's crazy that free agency hasn't started. Not to mention, like, it's been just under 20 or just over 24 hours since the negotiating window happened. There's a lot to talk about. Were you asleep when the Jets made their first move? You can be honest.
No, I wasn't.
You were awake?
The first two came in last night, and then I think Taylor finished it, right? Was he the final one last night?
Yeah, honestly, for me,
The text messages kept on coming through.
I was out cold. And this was great stuff by the Jets social department. Who else is up right now? This is like at 10 o'clock at night. And then after that, doubling down on it like, hey, who wants a coffee? What's everybody want? Would you drink coffee at 11:45 at night?
I would, certainly. I've never seen anybody in the social department actually drink coffee. Do they?
That's a good question. Yeah, I've seen a couple people drink coffee. I'm not a coffee guy myself.
Okay, you can't release their names, though.
I mean, I can, but our producers can let us know if we're allowed to release their names. I don't want to get anybody in trouble here. But let's talk about it. Jets made a couple moves. I know Jets Twitter was super anxious to get the first signing under the way. That wasn't a New York Jet last year. John Simpson, here it is. Ask for offensive line help. Here's some offensive line help. Tom Pelissero says veteran offensive lineman John Simpson signing with the Jets. Look, this was a Raven last year, a left guard, where he's expected to play in New York, which I think is key because there were some questions about where's AVT going to play, and if Simpson's likely the guy to play left guard for the Jets, that excludes left guard for AVT, who's now down to right guard, left tackle, or right tackle.
Well, yeah, you got to go back to before free agency actually started when the Jets released Laken Tomlinson. He was the only guy who actually played every snap for the Jets along that offensive line last season. But Simpson, what I like about him, monster, 6'4", 330 pounds, and he's coming off his best season in the National Football League with the Baltimore Ravens, of course, last season. And I think that he's going to change. He's going to help change that mindset up front because he is a nasty football player. And one of the guys I think is going to be most pumped about this acquisition is Breece Hall.
Yeah, Chris says, let's go. All right, yeah, let's go. John Simpson, left guard, started 19 games for the Ravens if you're including the playoffs, and this is someone that was a fourth-round pick in 2020, so this is now his third team in the NFL. But to your point, like, the Jets want stability. They want players that can be durable. Laken Tomlinson was ultra-durable. They elect to move on from him. John Simpson, I don't think this means that the Jets are done, though, at offensive line or guard either because they have holes to fill.
They're definitely not done along that offensive line. This is the first move and what you can expect to be multiple moves. Again, we have a couple stages here, whether it be free agency or the draft. There are different tiers and waves in free agency. But I know that the internet last night and this morning was replaying something that Chris Long said about John Simpson last season. A guy that keeps on popping out to me when I watch tape. This guy brings a physical element to that offensive line that fits what they want to do there in Baltimore perfectly. I just want to shout him out in the run game. I really like this guy.
Yeah, I think that he's a mauler. That's what he's known for, and the Jets obviously want to run the ball. I saw a comment that said, from Rob, said Breece Hall season.
Yep.
Yeah, to your point, this is like if you're Breece Hall, you're excited about this move. And I think it'll be, we're going to break down who's available still on day 2. It's not even day 2, it's like pre-day 2. What would you call this time period right now?
Oh, I don't know.
Like in limbo?
You don't even remember what day it is because for us, all the moves started coming in on Sunday. So, I mean, this is kind of like day 3 for us, but free agency starts actually tomorrow, Wednesday at 4 p.m.
So day 1 is officially tomorrow. We're still in day 0. Let's just call it. Like the negotiating window's all day 0.
I was talking to a few folks about this in the office that essentially the Jets have already made 7 moves. You had 2 unrestricted free agents who never hit the market in Chuck Clark and Greg Zuerlein. You had an RFA who didn't hit the market there in Kenny Yeboah. You had a street free agent in Oliver from San Francisco. And then you have the 3 UFAs headlined by you at the start of the show with John Simpson.
Okay, so I don't want to get to it yet, but Boy Green, Paul Esden, has asked a question. That's going to be our first question. I just want to say,
He doesn't sleep.
He doesn't sleep. Okay, we'll fire it up right now.
Yeah, I think he was posting to the laundromat last night.
He was. That was good
Okay, all
content,
right.
Paul. And Paul, this is your question. Well, first of all, it was awesome meeting you, too. He says, it was awesome meeting you all in person at the Hall of Fame game. He wants a sexy wide receiver trade.
Oh.
Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams, T. Higgins, perhaps? What say you?
You take that one first.
Okay, well, I think that...
T. Higgins has requested a trade. That's what
Yes.
reports
So,
have indicated.
so with T. Higgins, you have to give up draft capital. Klepp says T. Higgins would be nice. It would be nice. But, like, you got to give up capital. The Jets don't have a second-round pick. And then you also have to pay the guy because he wants a contract. That's why people don't like playing under the franchise.
And also, just because T. Higgins or his reps requested a trade doesn't mean the Cincinnati Bengals actually want
Yes.
to move him.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things at play there. You're talking about a
100%.
guy who's probably going to command more than $20 million, and also you got to give compensation up in return for his
And
talent.
then, of course, there's a...
if they're willing to move him.
That's a great point. And then I think there's a group of Jets fans that are like, all right, well, we have Garrett Wilson. Like, you'd want to see him as a Jet for life. So why not save some of that money? I understand the windows now, everything like that. But the other names on that list, Devontae Adams, we'll start with him. And before we get to Keenan Allen, like, I think there hasn't been any rumblings since last trade deadline about Devontae requesting a trade, potentially wanting to be reunited with Aaron Rodgers. The Raiders signed Gardner Minshew to compete with Aiden O'Connell. They could draft a guy. Like, I don't know if the move yesterday by signing Minshew in Devontae Adams' reps' mind or his mind is like, you know what? I'm here or I'm not here. I don't know how that impacts it. I think it's a 50-50 shot.
Well, he was very vocal and supportive of Antonio Pierce, and Antonio Pierce, of course, was the interim coach last year. He gets the full-time gig. Like you mentioned, Gardner Minshew is there. And then as recently as a couple weeks ago when we were at the scouting combine in Indianapolis, new Raiders GM Tom Telesco said Devontae Adams is a Raider. So
I think, yeah. I don't know. He's a great player. It's a lot. It'd be a lot of fun. And the storylines of Garrett Wilson, you know, what was it? Morstead had the photo of him giving the jersey of 5 to Garrett Wilson, passing down the torch. Wilson wore 5 at Ohio State. The Jets are getting new jerseys. Like,
I know
you really complete the story there.
Yeah, I know you're going to get to this later, but Darnell Mooney, I think, actually agreed to terms with the team here this morning before we came on air. But you're talking about Calvin Ridley, Josh Reynolds.
Hold on.
Marquise
New
Brown.
England is pushing to sign Calvin Ridley. I'm getting a notification on my watch right now.
That's interesting. Now they have cap room. They have a lot of cap room.
And they
we
got
saw-
Jacoby Brissett tossing
Yeah.
the pill now.
Right. And Brissett, interesting landing spot for him. But if you're him, you probably want to go to a spot where you have the ability to start next year. Now, even if the Patriots take a quarterback at number 3 overall, Brissett could say, hey, listen, I'm going to be the guy who's going to lead that franchise, at least in the short term, near term.
And I know that this is like a hard pivot from talking about John Simpson and Tyrod Taylor and whatnot, but this is what Schefter tweeted. New England is pushing to sign free agent wide receiver Calvin Ridley, but sources believe that he currently prefers to return to Jacksonville,
Well, if
and
it's-
he has been discussing a deal with the Jaguars.
Well, what do you think, Greens? Because there's 2 options for you. The Jets are going to see both teams next year. I say maybe it's better off if it's between those 2, you stay in Jacksonville.
Calvin Ridley, let me pitch to you, being a Jacksonville Jaguar. 1, it's cold in New England. It is frigid. 2, no state tax in Florida. 3, sunshine all year round. 4, you're familiar already. You got a rapport with Trevor Lawrence. Maybe you should just stay there. Stay out of the AFC East, unless you're a Jet. Because I think Jets fans would be very excited about that.
Listen, it makes sense from a New England standpoint when you're talking about Ridley as a guy who had more than 1,000 yards receiving last year for the Jaguars, got in the end zone quite a bit as well. He's a deep threat. He can take the top off of defense. I think he's a very good route runner. It makes a lot of sense for both teams to be interested there.
I definitely agree. The other thing with Calvin Ridley that's interesting to me is I'm pretty sure Jacksonville, if they re-sign him, that whatever draft, I think they gave up a 3rd-round pick. It becomes a 2nd if he remains with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And he had over 1,000 yards last season.
New England needs speed, too. I mean, when you really look at their roster, what is the deficiency? The Patriots need speed, and Ridley's a sub 4.4 guy.
Yeah, and he's a productive receiver. Then the Patriots re-signed Kendrick Bourne.
Yeah, right.
So he would be a nice addition in New England. And the third name, Boy Green, I didn't forget about it, is Keenan Allen in terms of a receiver trade.
Here's my thought on this. If you're the Chargers, don't you want Keenan Allen to retire a Charger?
Oh, I think so. Unless you're trying to manipulate the cap somehow.
Yeah, I don't know. Harbaugh coming in, this is a guy who is a consummate pro who's been so productive over the years. You have a very talented young quarterback. Yes, you're going to change up the philosophy quite a bit because you're going to incorporate a power run game, and I think you're going to have more physicality there than what we've seen in the past. But if you're the Chargers, I'd really be surprised if they part ways with him.
And also, the Chargers, their roster's good. You know, I know we're talking about the Jets here, but they have a good roster. Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, I think a lot of people believe one of those two guys will not be in LA next year.
Right.
They have the number 5 overall pick. They could be looking at, you know, probably an outside chance looking at Marvin Harrison available, but you could be looking at Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze if you wanted to go in that direction to add to that room too. So That's food for thought. Let's move on back to the Jets here for a minute. Boy Green, thank you for the question, and I very much enjoy the beginning of most of your tweets that have some crazy copy to it, like holy salted sea monkeys, something crazy like that. I find that funny. Anyway.
Hey.
Jets, Tyrod Taylor, that was their second move. And the Jets, we talked about this ad nauseum in terms of who would the green and white want to bring in as a backup, because they wanted a veteran backup after what happened to Aaron Rodgers 4 snaps into the season, and they agreed to terms with Tyrod Taylor, who probably doesn't have to move apartments or homes. I don't know what his housing is like right now, but I imagine he doesn't have to move.
He doesn't have to. Who knows if he bought or is he renting? I mean, Giants the last couple seasons. But here's a guy who's 34 years old. He's going to turn 35 in season. What I like about Tyrod is 65 touchdown passes in his career, 29 interceptions. Career mark 28-1 as a starter. But with that being said, he protects the football. He still is very mobile. The one concern you have over time is that he's taken some big pops and missed some time. But again, as far as a backup quarterback is concerned, you want to have somebody in there if Rodgers unfortunately goes down again for just a couple games, who can come in there and navigate it for you and lead you to some victories. And I think Tyrod Taylor would fill that bill. I mean, you never want to see Aaron Rodgers ever go down again for 17 games where he's missing the season. And from all accounts, he's doing great on his rehab and he's ready to rock and roll. But Tyrod Taylor, if he has to come in and play 2 or 3 games for you with what the Jets have around him, I think he can lead you to a few victories.
No offense to Tyrod Taylor. If you're a Jets fan, you want to see him on the sideline because you're hoping Aaron Rodgers plays all 17. We have more breaking news.
Oh.
Here we go. Derrick Henry agreed or purportedly agrees to terms with signing with the Baltimore Ravens. The King will now play in the Queen City.
Good tweet, Shefty. I actually thought he might end up in Dallas after Pollard left via free agency, but that's an interesting backfield now. You know, the Jets actually get Simpson coming over from the Baltimore Ravens, but the Ravens have Lamar Jackson and the King Henry in that backfield. So I'll tell you what, defenses, that's a tough play there as far as those read options are concerned. Man, pick your poison.
I thought that Charlotte was the Queen City, not Baltimore. Am I wrong on that? Like, it was a good tweet. It was properly worded. We need a fact check on that. So can someone please look that up? Is Charlotte known as the Queen City? Am I making that up? Did I just hear that wrong? Whatever it is.
It's an end of an era, that's for sure. A hell of a run there for Henry in Tennessee. What a great running back. But again, you're pairing him up in the backfield with Lamar Jackson, and that's going to keep every defense on their toes.
I definitely agree with that. This is what you love about free agency. You get breaking news. You get teams you don't think about signing guys. Like, I think not a lot of people thought Josh Jacobs was going to be a Packer this time yesterday.
Or Aaron Jones going to Minnesota.
Yeah, there's a lot of movement. But anyway, back to your regularly scheduled programming. Tyrod Taylor.
Yep.
Oh, wait, hold on. Charlotte, Cincinnati, and Baltimore, all known as the Queen City.
Okay, that's fine.
There's only one king, 3 queens. That's what we're getting at here?
I guess so.
All right, so
It's your chessboard. All right.
all right, so Tyrod Taylor, going back to this, the Freedom House 1984. Thank you. It was a good signing. Is that a? I wanted to see what kind of animal that was in the thumb. What kind of animal is that? I can't tell. It looks like a bird, I think,
I
right?
can't tell.
Okay, well, we're going to go with a bird. But anyway, can you name all 5 teams? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 teams Tyrod has played on? This is his 14th year in the National Football League. 6th-round pick out of Virginia Tech by the Ravens, so I gave one of them away. But Joe Douglas was actually a scout for Baltimore when they selected Tyrod.
Baltimore, Buffalo.
That's 2.
Cleveland,
That's 3.
the Chargers.
That's 4. There's 2 more. We're excluding the Jets here. One of them was last year.
The Giants.
The Giants, and then I'll give you a clue. The Jets played against Taylor.
The Texans.
That's right. That's all 6.
And now the Jets.
Okay.
What do you got, breaking news?
No, we got an answer on the animal thumbnail. It's a parrot. Well, that's ironic, but
The Freedom House.
the Freedom House. Okay.
I like Tyrod.
Can we shout out Randy Lang? I know I name dropped there, but he wrote this in while he was sharing some stats with us. Tyrod, since 2011, a 2.2 to 1 touchdown to interception ratio, is the 20th best among NFL quarterbacks with at least 1,000 passes. Rodgers is number 1. Taylor, 1.7 interception rate, number 5 in that same span. Rodgers,
Number 1.
number 1. He's only lost 6 fumbles in his career, the second fewest among quarterbacks with at least 1,000 attempts. Again, if you're a Jets fan, you hope you don't see him on the field in the regular season, but it's a good signing. It's necessary.
And you'll see him in the preseason playing some action. I do actually think now this is a revamped quarterback room. Big picture, we know the Jets have given Zach Wilson and his team permission to seek a trade, so we'll have to see what happens here as the league year commences. But I would not be surprised at all. Hey, maybe the Jets, Tyrod Taylor, 34 going to 35. You got Aaron Rodgers, 40. He's going to be 41 in December. Maybe what do you think about taking a flyer on a quarterback on day 3 of the draft?
I like it.
Okay.
I mean, I think that – I know this is probably not – I don't know if it's a day 3 selection. Obviously, we'll see what happens.
Oh, you got a name already?
Well, I was going to say one of the guys when we did the grids in the Combine – I think it was Trevor Sikkema from Pro Football Focus wrote Spencer Rattler as like his wild card.
Yeah.
I think that'd be kind of fun. Yeah, he's got some name recognition to him. He's got potential.
I just don't see Rattler happening. Transfer from Oklahoma, finished his career at South Carolina, did a lot of good things at the end of last year especially. I just don't see it happening because the Jets don't have a 2. And it might be a little bit of a reach for this team to take a quarterback in as early as 3.
But what happens, hypothetically
You
speaking?
say he's dropping a 5, maybe?
No,
Something like
4,
that?
because the
Okay.
Jets right now have 2 fourth-round picks. If he's available at one of them, I would take a flyer on there.
Okay.
Joe Douglas has shown to take flyers on day 3 in terms of quarterbacks in round 4.
Yeah, well, to see what happens, huh?
So we will have to see what happens. Speaking of South Carolina Gamecocks, last night Jets added a former one,
Transition.
Javon Kinlaw,
Right.
San Francisco 49er as a rookie and under his rookie deal, number 14 overall selection. This guy, I mean, if you don't know much about him outside of like, okay, he played on the 49ers, Saleh coached him for a year. He is so long. Like his arms are, I mean, just look at the thumbnail. His arm is like scratching his kneecap and he's not bent over. That is crazy. And he's got an 83 wingspan.
All right. So there's a bunch of things you got to like about this signing. Just the raw athleticism. Again, much like Simpson, he's coming off his best year in the National Football League with the 49ers. And then the system familiarity going back to 2020, his rookie season when Robert Saleh was still the defensive coordinator in San Francisco. The other thing to keep in mind is the Jets seem to sign guys in free agency along that defensive line who all of a sudden come here and have a career year. Most recently, it was Quentin Jefferson, who I wonder if this means that he actually ends up somewhere else now. I think he had 6.5 sacks last year, but these guys come in along that defensive line, have career years. We saw that with Solomon Thomas as well. Solomon Thomas remains an unrestricted free agent. I don't necessarily think the Jets are done at defensive tackle. Will we see Solomon Thomas back?
Yeah,
And again, and Quentin Jefferson is a guy they really liked inside the building as well. He played very well. But my point at Kinlaw is he's young. He's 26. He's coming off his best year in the league. And Saleh liked him way back in the day in 2020.
Yeah, and I think that if you look at what the Jets like in defensive linemen specifically, you have length. He definitely has length. You have tenacity. He fits the bill of what, like, if he were Clay, right, and the Jets would want to mold him, like, to your point, Quentin Jefferson career year in sacks, Solomon Thomas, same thing. Kinlaw has tremendous talent, and I think
319.
he's huge.
Career high 3.5 sacks to go with 25 tackles last year, the 3 PDs and 6 quarterback hits. And again, potentially he could be lining up against one of the best defensive tackles in football, in Quentin Williams. And that makes you better off to get.
And I just think that, to your point, Jets aren't necessarily done there. If just a numbers perspective alone, the Jets need a couple more bodies. I actually think one of the people that's not spoken about at all in terms of that defensive tackle spot is Perion Winfrey, who got hurt.
Yeah,
and he's not an unrestricted free agent. He's not a free agent, period. So I would imagine that if healthy, he's taking significant snaps in training camp.
Yeah, and getting back to Kinlaw, he's a former first-round pick, too. I mean, not far removed from being a first-round pick. And again, his career's ascending. And that's what you want to do in free agency. Pick up these guys who are ascending. Now, most notably under Joe Douglas, you go to DJ Reed or Tyler Conklin. You want to have guys like that as part of your team, as part of your system. And I think both these signings make a lot of sense.
And I will say, in terms of that, John Simpson was a Raider. I would say, like, up until last year, I think, was a career year for him, too.
Yes.
So it seems to me like maybe this is a guy that, like, takes a couple of years to figure it out, and then you figure it out and you take off. Like, DJ Reed wasn't the player he is today that he was for Robert Saleh in San Francisco. Saleh's the first one to admit that. Hasn't Saleh said in the past, like, hey, I tried to move him around, like, to safety. He said, no, I'm playing cornerback. And he was great.
Right. Well, yeah, they looked at his size, his stature, and said, you're going to play inside, where and we've seen DJ Reed thrive on the outside. But in terms of Kinlaw, you know, you go back to that rookie year where Saleh's talking about him loving his mindset and loving his practice habits.
So one more Adam Schefter news here. Irv Smith Jr. to the Chiefs. I mean, they have a tight end already in Travis Kelce. He's obviously a fantastic player. But I think those are the moves that the Jets made yesterday, overnight. Tyrod Taylor, John Simpson, and Javon Kinlaw. Then you factor in who the Jets already signed that we spoke about yesterday, that you and Caroline talked about. Greg Zuerlein, Chuck Clark, Isaiah Oliver, Kenny Yeboah. So I think that the Jets right now, they're still meat on the bone, just from a numbers perspective, from a position perspective. And there's one YouTube question. Proud New York Jets fan said, get me Alexander Madison to back up Brees and Curtis Samuel to team up with Garrett Wilson, GW. Both available, as in Madison and Samuel. What are your thoughts on those two?
Yeah, you know, the running back position's very interesting right now because the Jets got their workhorse. They got a young guy in the stable. So you would figure that they're going to add a veteran in the mix. Again, we're seeing the wide receiver market. It's been kind of slow, but it looks like Ridley, we could have some movement on Ridley. We saw some movement on Mooney this morning. Who did he agree to term? We got some breaking news here.
Well, Darnell Mooney signed with the Falcons earlier, but
Oh, here you go.
Here you
Another
go, Connor,
defensive
again.
tackle in the house.
Jets are signing Cardinals defensive tackle Leki Fotu per sources. First of all, just a fantastic name, Leki Fotu. He played for the Cardinals. He was a fourth-round pick, number 114 overall in the 2020 draft. So the same draft class as Javon Kinlaw and John Simpson, actually. And he went to Utah.
A star rugby player growing up. How about that?
I think, look, we just talked about it, but he's 6'5", 334. From weight alone, this guy could be the run stuffer type that you and I have had conversations about, not on air, but like Al Woods ruptured his Achilles in Denver. Jets needed a run stuffer. Leki Fotu, I hope I'm saying that right. Leki Fotu. Yeah, The phonetic pronunciation on Pro Football Reference, shout out to you. You helped me out big time. Leki Fotu could be the run stuffer that the Jets were looking for, and they got one. And in this defense, someone like this, I don't know what the reaction is on Jets Twitter. It's probably a lot of Googling, like who is Leki Fotu and what's his story.
Right.
But a guy that's a run stuffer in this defense that Jeff Ulbrich has curated and Robert Saleh has curated, you're probably not playing more than 20 snaps, 20, 25 snaps a game. So I think that this is the type of signing that makes sense for the Jets.
He appeared in 11 games last season for the Cardinals at 2.5 sacks, I think 15 solo tackles for his career. Fotu, 56 games played with the Cardinals from 20 to 2023, made 21 starts, 89 tackles, 42 solos, 47 assists, 7 quarterback hits, 3.5 sacks, career high 2.5 sacks last year. So he's pressing the pocket from the interior. But you're right about the size. Again, we started off by talking about Kinlaw. Now Fotu is a guy who is 6'5", 335 pounds. And this is kind of a change in philosophy. And Saleh talked about it last year with the signing of a guy like Al Woods, is that to have that big body dude lining up against adjacent to a Quinnen Williams. I mean, that's a house, 6'5", 335.
It is a house. I want to look up what Al Woods' height weight was just as a comparison, because Al Woods is a towering human being. Al Woods is 6'4", 331. Leki is 6'4", 330.
Yeah, I got him at 6'5", 334.
6'5", 334. That's great. Also, I know this is not draft season, but I just pulled up Dane Brugler's The Beast from 2020 when Leki was a college prospect. And just here's a little background on him. You talked about the rugby. His focus was rugby, playing for the USA Boys All-American team and training with a club team in England, the London Wasps. I see it as a depth guy, more rotational defensive pieces. That's probably, that's what, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay, so.
I think that's completely fair.
Well, rugby, first of all, to your point, the rugby stuff is cool. Then Fotu moved to Utah his senior year of high school, turned his focus to football at Harriman High School. As a senior, he earned first-team All-State and MVP honors in the state's highest classification, posting 82 tackles, 9.5 sacks, and leading the team to its first championship since 2015.
Yeah, listen, so we've seen the Jets address defensive tackle here early in the negotiation period with that 52-hour window, because we're wondering where this could end up, because you had Solomon Thomas, Quentin Jefferson, and Al Woods all with expiring contracts. Now you get Kinlaw, a former first-round pick who's 26 years old, coming off a career best season, who's got the system familiarity and the coaching familiarity with that connection with Robert Saleh, and then you add that big body. So when we talk about Fotu's measurables, the person that you actually think about is Al Woods. Now, this is a younger version, a guy who was out there on the West Coast who's going to make that transition here to the East Coast. And like the fan just said out there with the post, is that, listen, that's what the Jets do. That's what they do up front, is that rotate along that defensive line. And you need big bodies if teams are going to try to hammer at you.
And I don't know what you think, but I'd be curious. Like, I don't think the Jets are necessarily done at edge either.
No. Well, that's a good point about edge, because, we're not bearing the lead here. It's Bryce Huff, obviously, landing the big deal with the Philadelphia Eagles 3-year contract. The biggest contract, I think, by non-quarterback undrafted free agent in the history of the league.
Kudos to Huff.
But you got John Franklin Myers, who I think is always vastly underrated, almost criminally underrated, because he's the guy who sets that edge on the outside, always great pad level, just a consummate pro. We got a breakout star, I think, in Jermaine Johnson, and he took Will McDonald 15th overall last year. Michael Clemens is another depth piece for you, a tough guy on the outside who provides some special teams ability as well. But, yeah, I don't necessarily think you're done at defensive at the edge spot.
Speaking of edge, Shaq Barrett earlier, right before we got on here, signed with the Dolphins. That's
I think I saw that.
And there's a couple guys who are available that I want to talk about in a minute, but we do have another YouTube comment. Alabama Jets fan.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Cortland Sutton, wide receiver 2, in a trade. Curtis Samuel, wide receiver 3. Kevin Zeitler, the Ravens guard, need to all be next. Let's start with Cortland Sutton. We talked about those other 3 guys, Keenan, Devontae, and T. Higgins.
Yeah.
Cortland Sutton definitely, I don't think, would cost the same amount of draft capital.
No.
But I don't know if – I feel like after the Jerry Jeudy trade, I have no idea what Denver's intent is. Obviously, I wouldn't know, but I don't feel like that's been publicized.
Well, they're eating a lot of cap, right? Because of Russell.
Yes.
Russell Wilson, now Pittsburgh Steelers. Going to take me a little bit of time getting used to that. There's so much transition in the league. Obviously, he's going to go there and compete for the job. A lot of people think that ultimately that's going to be his spot. But, yeah, Sutton potentially there on the market. That would make sense. But, again, I'm not anti-trade. Where do you stand on this? My thing with the wide receiver position is, number one is it's not just the compensation. You have to pay these guys. So there's 2 things that work here. I'm not saying Cortland Sutton's not a good player or wouldn't be a good player with Aaron Rodgers, but I think a lot of people will be. And then you get to the draft. Again, if you're the Jets or if you're any team who could use another receiver, I could certainly see the Jets making a free agent play at receiver here. But does it make sense necessarily unless you got this guy way above everybody else to make a play as far as the trade is concerned?
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I agree with that. And I think with Cortland Sutton or any of those guys.
And I definitely would, I will say this, I would definitely would not trade for receiver and then double down and add another free agent
Yeah, I think
at receiver.
I
with
also
this,
think,
with this draft class.
Right, exactly. I think the biggest thing with the draft is that everybody who's a highly touted prospect to a potential day 3 pick, this is one of the deepest receiver classes in recent memory, but you can't bank necessarily on that player turning into something. Like the benefit of Cortland Sutton or someone like that is that you kind of know what you have in Cortland Sutton. And from a year-to-year standpoint, like I'm looking at his contract right now online, and his yearly cash this year is like $13 million, $14 million in 2025. Then he's an unrestricted free agent. So
He makes sense. Okay, like on the surface, he makes a lot of sense here. He's got the size. He's going to play on the outside, 6'4", 216. Look at his production last year was off the charts. You're talking about 59 catches. Okay, but 10 of those went for touchdowns.
yeah, he was a touchdown machine. And I think that Cortland Sutton, like, he's another big-bodied guy.
Yeah.
I don't know what his ability is as a run blocker per se, but I believe I've seen a couple clips of him getting after it in the run game. I think that it makes sense to your point. The question is, what's the capital? Like, the Jets actually, ironically, have Denver's 4th-round pick.
Yeah.
So, like, could that make sense in a trade back to Denver and you get Cortland Sutton? I think there's a lot of moving pieces here. He's obviously not a free agent. That's the one thing there. Like Curtis Samuel was one of the other guys on that screen.
Right.
He's a free agent. And just while we're at it, let me just fire off who's still available at wide receiver in terms of free agency. We talked about Calvin Ridley before. If you missed it, the Patriots are pursuing him, but Ridley's still negotiating with the Jaguars, and he would prefer to stay in Jacksonville. Then there's guys like Hollywood Brown, Darnell Mooney off the board. Tyler Boyd has been a popular name, I think, in Jets Twitter. I actually think we have a YouTube comment about that. Odell Beckham Jr., who was nearly a Jet last year and a Raven this past season, he's available. And then you get your flyer guys like VR Diesel.
Right.
That's close to Vin Diesel, which has a close place in my heart because of Fast and Furious. But would love Tyler Boyd as a wide receiver. 5 years in a row, 800 yards with studs like Chase and Higgins. Thoughts? I will say the one thing about Tyler Boyd I think is interesting. He's got great size. He's been predominantly a slot receiver, which you don't think of in terms of guys that are 6'3", 200 plus.
Yeah, I like Boyd. I think he's a very good player. Again, there is a puzzle here because Garrett Wilson is so productive and he's so good is that he's a natural playing outside and at that slot position. But when you look at your roster configuration, how does that impact everybody else as far as like where you ultimately want to put Garrett Wilson?
Can we throw up that Tyler Boyd thing again real quick?
And by the way, you're going to move Garrett Wilson. I know that.
Yes, totally. So, VR, I just want to say, this is you versus Pro Football Reference here. Pro Football Reference has 5 straight years. No, 4. You have 5. Pro Football Reference has 4 straight years of over 800 yards. He had 762 in 2022, 667 in 2023. This is still a very valid point. Fresh 3, 5, 4, 2. Looks like a Planet Fitness in the background based on the purple. But look, you want Tyler Boyd too? I understand. I think the one guy we didn't really talk about,
Which one?
I mentioned it in terms of receivers, like Odell. Like, he didn't have a great year in Baltimore, but he was their number 2 receiver to Zay Flowers. What do you think about a potential guy like that coming here who was almost a Jet last year?
All right, so let's go to Boyd real quick. You gotta like the consistency that he put up in Cincinnati the past 4 seasons. You go 79 catches, 67, 58, 67, 841, 828, 762, 667.
And he's done it with and without Burrow.
Yeah, in terms of yards, just consistent, smooth, 6'2", 203, 29 years old. He's been a very good player since coming out of Pittsburgh. He'll turn 30 in the season next year in 2024, but good ball player.
He's been in the league forever, too.
Yeah. And sorry to get off here.
No, that's fine.
Off tangent, but who?
I was talking about Odell.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I'm going to throw him out there. I don't think you'd be in on this necessarily because he's been so injury-plagued.
Why are you saying me? I'm not making the call.
I'm not saying you. I'm just saying,
that seems quite personal.
I don't know if you'll be a fan of this idea, this hypothesis here. What do you think about the idea of Michael Thomas? Star player at his heyday, hasn't been healthy in a while. Kind of feels like like in terms of Odell, like hasn't been fully healthy. He was this past year, Odell, but he battled injuries. Both star players in their heyday, both in the twilights, would you say, of their career? Like there's more.
Yeah, I would certainly say. I think it's fair to say that. Yeah, they're back.
I'm not trying to be mean to Odell and Michael Thomas.
You're a golfer.
Yeah, they'll beat me up.
I think it's fair to say. I do think that. I don't know. Fortunately, I don't have to make the contracts. But if you're a team, don't you have to make that an incentive-laden deal with one of those guys?
Yeah, you might.
And it feels like it would have to be quite short-term, right? You're talking maybe potentially. What do you think ultimately where those guys are going to wind up? Do you think it's going to be a one-year deal?
I would say between the two, Thomas would be more likely just because he hasn't been fully healthy over the past X amount of years.
Right.
Odell played a full season.
What we have to, I think big picture too is
762, it's close enough that 1 year. I rounded up.
All good, Diesel. All good, man. My thing is, when you look at the Jets receivers, you got Garrett Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody in the organization is confident that Lazard's going to be in a bounce-back mode.
For sure.
You saw Xavier Gibson and Jason Brownlee. Those guys are going to provide some depth at the position, and they took some strides in year 1. So how many receivers are we talking about? Because we got a couple people coming in here saying you're going to get 2 receivers here in free agency, or you're going to trade for one and sign one. What about the draft as well? I'm a big fan. I like what the Jets have done so far in free agency. Again, nothing sexy here, nothing. But starting with Kinlaw Simpson, 26-26, guys coming off their best career years. I mean, so they're sending players and things like that. But I do love the draft because it's cost controlled.
Yes, of course. I mean, how could you not? That's why the recipe, a lot of people think in terms of your team, it's like your window is when your rookie quarterback is on their rookie contract, or maybe not as a rookie per se, but like you have 4 or 5 years before you really start to pay a guy. But as long as they're good, you'll be in it. And the Jets have the inverse of the classic formula right now, where they're paying the quarterback, but the talent is so good around Aaron Rodgers, like Garrett, Sauce, Jermaine Priest, just to name a few.
Right.
And those guys are cost controlled.
Yes, no doubt. And here's something that I don't know. You're monitoring some of the comments, and so are the folks in the back. What up, everybody? Is we sit here today, what would you say the number one need is for the Jets?
Tackle.
Exactly.
Which is what we should talk about right now.
Right. It's tackle.
And it's
not receiver, it's tackle.
It is. And I agree with your point. Like, whoever Aaron plays with, it's going to be better. And Lazard will be better in 2024 than he was in 23.
Right. And I'm not saying you're not going to add somebody. You are.
Yes.
I think we're safe to assume that that's happening. Jets are going to add somebody, whether that's early in the draft or here in free agency. But number one would be tackle. Again, what do you think ultimately happens with AVT? Because if you're going to tell me AVT is a guard, you're pretty good on the interior right now because you got Simpson, you got Tippmann, you got AVT, you got Schweitzer.
I think if we've been seeing some Kevin Zeitler comments in here.
Yes.
Hypothetically speaking, the Jets are like, hey, Baltimore, by the way, we're taking not only your left guard, we're also signing your right guard. To me, AVT's playing tackle.
So we're taking a couple of kings from the Queen City?
That's right. Couple kings from the Queen City as the King Derrick Henry arrives in the Queen City in Baltimore. But that YouTube comment before, Tyron Smith is obviously the big ticket free agent. Then there's Trent Brown. There's Jonah Williams.
No pun intended.
Yeah, no pun intended. Then there's also this guy who shook free yesterday, David Bakhtiari. Talk about a guy who, in his heyday, very good player, battling injuries. Obviously, there's a connection there. Aaron Rodgers and David Bakhtiari, very, very close friends. And I think a lot of fans, media are like, oh, that's a Jet. But I don't necessarily know if that's the case. We haven't seen anything yet.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. But again, when he's been on the field, solid football player.
Yeah, it's a great football player.
So again, comfortable with the system too. That's another thing. Not just the relationship with Rodgers. It's coming in and playing tackle. Playing with Aaron, it would be, it's no transition for him.
Yeah, he'd step on the field and immediately be a player. I think the biggest question is injury concerns and what do you do if the Jets were to sign Tyron Smith or David Bakhtiari?
Yep.
Both of those guys have injury concerns. Hypothetically speaking, the rest of your offensive line is set between some form of tackle or AVT, whether that's him at guard, him at tackle, whatever. My biggest question is how do you plan for the worst case scenario? Because the Jets have had that up front each of the past 2 seasons. So to me, that's something that you have to kind of take into account, but also can I play hypothetical here?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what we're here for.
So hypothetically speaking, going back to Kevin Zeitler, let's say the Jets add Zeitler. That means AVT's likely playing tackle. So let's say they add Bakhtiari or Tyron Smith at left tackle, Simpson, Tippmann, Zeitler, AVT. Do you consider tackle at 10 overall? Even though that player might not play that much as a rookie, if at all. Do you consider it? If Fashanu and Fuaga or whomever is available?
100%.
Thank
Yes.
you. I agree with that.
Yes. Again, where's Alt going to go? By the way, Alt is 6'8". I had some people say 6'9". That's crazy as far as his athleticism for a dude 6'8", former hockey player. Shout out to you. Fashion was very interesting, and then some people are thinking, and we talked to people in Indianapolis about it who made the great point about, hey, right tackle, in many cases, just as valuable as the left tackle because a lot of these edge guys are lining up at LD. So, yes, no matter what happens from here on out as far as the offensive line is concerned, like the names you just mentioned, I certainly could see the Jets taking a tackle at 10. If you're asking us right now as far as percentage-wise, pie chart, the biggest piece of that pie is tackle right now.
100%. Can we throw that comment back up so I can read it off? It was about tackle. It said, I'm with Zach Bender's comment. So Mike shouting out, Zach, good job by you. Smith as in Tyron Smith or Brown as in Trent Brown and grab Talisa Fuaga in the first round. So here's where I stand with that. If you're signing Tyron Smith or Trent Brown, I assume that's to play left tackle. I imagine Fuaga at right tackle if he's available at 10.
Yes.
That means AVT is likely a guard.
Right.
What happens if Smith, hypothetically, is the left tackle? He hasn't played a full season since 2015.
Right.
Then, if he's bound to miss a couple games, what's your insurance policy? Is that also free agency? Is that Carter Warren? Is it Max Mitchell? I think that's really, if you're a Jets fan, that's what you should be focused on.
Well, yeah, and that's something we forget when we start looking at needs because we're thinking about frontline players. You need backup players. You need reserves to continue to get better over time. the one person who potentially could be a long-term solve at a swing tackle for you is the aforementioned Carter Warren. I mean, he's just got his feet wet in the National Football League.
Totally. And I think he'll benefit from having a full offseason. Because remember, the Jets drafted him. He was dealing with a knee injury. He got hurt in the Hall of Fame game. Then he was dealing with another injury. Like, I think that the consensus among Jets Twitter, and including like Damian Woody is a big Carter Warren guy, just by looking at what he's been saying. I think Leger Douzable has mentioned him a couple times too. Like, he's shown flashes.
Right.
So you have high hopes for someone like that, but do you really want to go into the season with him as your backup swing tackle? That's the question that Joe Douglas and his staff are going to have to figure out between now and the start of training camp.
I think I'd be comfortable with that. Me personally, I'd be comfortable with that. We saw enough from him in a small sample size last year where you can build off of that.
And the Jets,
And he could be a key reserve for you.
I agree with that. And also think about what the Jets had as reserve tackle last year. They had Warren, they had Mitchell, and Billy Turner.
Yep.
So they had a lot of pieces there. So pieces will be added.
Well, that's another good point here is that you just mentioned Billy, is that Dwayne Brown out there and Mekhi Becton out there. Now,
Yeah.
What's going to happen with Becton?
I think it's a great question. That's what you were saying as a pun earlier, right?
Well,
Big
because
ticket.
you
I did say the big ticket.
You said you called Smith the big ticket.
I know. I heard that in real time, and then I said big ticket free agent. So
I know what you were saying there.
I know. No, it was. You were 100% right, and we'll see what happens with Mekhi Becton.
Because again, when he's been healthy, he's shown flashes of being a dominant player.
And shout out to him for one staying healthy
Yeah.
after 2 years of
No doubt.
not being on the football field, trimming down, staying lean. He's still tweeting every day a photo from the gym. So we'll see what happens with Mekhi Becton, whether that's back in green and white in 24 or elsewhere. This is my story. AS, re-sign our MVP, punter, Thomas Morstead. Look, he's a free agent. I will say one thing before you get into Morstead is that Rich Cimini tweeted this. I don't know what kind of contractual language would prevent someone from signing in these next couple days, but Cimini tweeted something that said something in Morstead's contract prohibits him from signing a contract up until the new league year officially begins, which is 4 o'clock tomorrow. I'm just saying, don't sweat. If you're a Jets fan, don't sweat that he's going to sign elsewhere.
I'm not sweating. It's cold in the studio. But listen, getting Z back was huge. 35 or 38 last year. Come on. And then he's had 11 50-plus field goals in the last 2 seasons. Yeah, you want Morstead back. He was great last year. You could make the argument the Jets had the best kicking duo in the National Football League, and then you're getting Rodgers back into the equation. The other unrestricted free agent we haven't really talked about here today is that Justin Hardy also out there right now on the market. And Oliver, the pickup from San Francisco, is a guy who's not only going to provide depth in the secondary, but he could ultimately become a key special teams player for you.
Yeah, and the Jets like Irv Charles a lot.
Yes.
But you talk about special team core guys, like Kenny Yeboah is one of those guys.
Yep.
Ashton Davis, unrestricted free agent, he's one of those guys. So the Jets have some.
I'm glad you just brought up safety, because that's another position where I don't think the Jets are necessarily done, because you do have, okay, Tony Adams, he's your free safety. Chuck Clark, pencil him in as strong safety. You got JBC coming off his rookie year. Jets are not done at that position. What's going to happen with Ashton Davis? Also, what's going to happen with Jordan Whitehead?
Yeah. Well, the available safeties outside of Jordan Whitehead and Ashton Davis include Justin Simmons, cut by the Broncos. He's a fantastic player.
He's going to get money.
CJ Gardner-Johnson, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson.
Yes.
Cameron Curl from Washington. Quandre Diggs. Jeremy Chin. Those are like the top free agents at safety. And then there's obviously a lot more depth pieces as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting when we go to the defensive side of the ball. We were talking about defensive tackle, what was going to happen. Well, we've seen the Jets make 2 moves as far as free agency is concerned, guys coming from elsewhere. At safety, they stay in-house with Chuck Clark, and the 2 other guys remain UFAs at this point. I don't know. You correct me if I'm wrong here. The word that we got in Indianapolis from guys who break down the tape is that safety at the top of the draft, people don't see it this year, but it's the day 3, and maybe that's where that's position in need is going to fit value for the Jets.
And that's where Joe Douglas has found value for the Jets since becoming GM. Like Ashton Davis was a third-round pick in 2020. Tony Adams, undrafted free
Undrafted
agent.
free
JBC's like a day 3 pick, 6th round. So I think that's really where, in the past, Joe Douglas has done his safety shopping. Now, you mentioned, or we talked about edge earlier. I just want to put some names out there who are available. Daniil Hunter is one of the more touted players in terms of his pedigree as a pass rusher. Shaq Barrett, if you just missed it, signed with the Dolphins. Chase Young is available. He was with San Francisco. Talented player. Jadeveon Clowney, Bud Dupree, Josh Uche, Randy Gregory, Yannick Ngakoue, who's been in the league forever. He was
Yes.
part of that Saxonville team.
Feels like he's always a free agent as well.
I know. It's a good point. One name that I'll throw out there that has a Joe Douglas connection is Derek Barnett. He was a Philadelphia Eagle, drafted in 2017. Jody was there in Philadelphia when they drafted him. Then Barnett was most recently a Houston Texan with DeMeco Ryan, similar-ish system to the Jets. And I'm not saying that if you sign a guy like Derek Barnett, you're expecting him to become a 10-sack player. But the Jets need rotational pieces. So to me, Derek Barnett is a name to watch. The other guys like Dante Fowler and Jacob Martin, also who was a Jet for a little bit before he was traded to the Broncos, also a free agent.
Yeah, again, this is an attractive landing spot for free agents out there. I mean, if you want to come somewhere where you're going to play in an attack system, a wide 9, you're going to have the ability to rush the passer, the Jets are your spot. And we've seen a lot of people come here and have tremendous success. Most notably, you're talking about Bryce Huff, who had this great rise over 3 years and then breaking out in year 4 before cashing in a free agency. But again, Jermaine Johnson looks like he's got star in him. John Franklin Myers has been really good on the outside. Will McDonald's got freakish ability. I will say this about Will McDonald, and I'm not putting any pressure on him, but I think he ended up with 3.5 sacks last year. If you gave him the snaps that were probably equivalent to Huff, he might have been in the 8.5 sack range. Yeah, so
Just by math alone, that
yes, yeah, just looking at it from math. I'm not comparing the players at all. They're totally different. They're built completely different. But while Huff is a freak, I think that McDonald has freakish ability. And speaking of Solomon Thomas, we were talking about him before. Solomon Thomas said, and I wasn't asking him straight up about Will McDonald. I was asking him about the defensive line. I said, what about the pieces there? He said, we consider Will McDonald, the guys in the room, a player who's going to have 10 sacks a year kind of guy.
and
I didn't ask him straight up, hey, what do you think about Will McDonald? I said, what do you think about the pieces of the room? He volunteered that.
I think that's great insight. And for what it's worth, I think a lot of people are like, hey, Will McDonald just kind of like follow that blueprint that Jermaine put out. Jermaine, you got to give credit to him. But Will McDonald's also told me that he's working out with Jermaine for a portion of the offseason. And Will McDonald, I think, was a little
I want that workout
mad at
plan,
himself.
whatever Jermaine did after year 1.
I agree with that. That's the beach workout.
Yeah.
That's the summer workout right there. Anyway, just one final thing before we wrap up here. I just want to kind of circle back on the day 1 signings that you think, 1, affect the Jets, or 2, that stood out to you. And I'll just read out a couple of them, like in terms of who the Jets play in 2023, or 2024, excuse me. Sam Darnold, right now, you would imagine he's the starter of the Minnesota Vikings unless they potentially draft a guy, which they could. Aaron Jones goes from Green Bay. He says, you know what? Thanks for letting me go. I'm going to go to your rival, Minnesota. The Purple Sombrero, he's now in Minnesota. Blake Cashman, former Jet, he's in Minnesota.
Wow.
The Rams, they re-signed Kevin Dotson. Then they add more beef up front with Jonah Jackson, the Detroit Lions Pro Bowl guard. The 49ers, they add Leonard Floyd on the edge. And correct me if I'm wrong, it was Leonard Floyd who was rushing the passer when Aaron Rodgers' Achilles ruptured,
Yeah,
right?
to bring that up.
I'm just saying, a little bit of a... You added, there was a revenge game there. There was a revenge game in terms of like Aaron Rodgers going to San Francisco, where he's from.
I mark it down. I think that's my guess. You're asking me where the Jets are playing week 1?
Oh, I didn't ask, but this is great.
San Francisco.
Okay.
That's what I got.
Rock and roll.
I'm circling that in my calendar.
You mentioned Russell and the Steelers. That's
makes
an
sense.
ad there. The Dolphins lost a lot of players. Maybe that's your headline. Christian Wilkins, Robert Hunt, Andrew Van Ginkel.
I tend to focus as you continue to with the names, and I want to get your thoughts here as we close. I tend to focus on what's happened inside the division because those are the teams you're going to be playing twice, right? Miami you just mentioned a number of guys. Wilkins is a beast.
Yep.
Now he's playing with the Raiders. No, Xavier Howard, he says he's not returning there in Miami. They got a new defensive coordinator. They've had to make a number of changes along that defensive side of the ball. Buffalo, we saw a little bit of a salary cap purge as far as, and that was necessary for them because they're surrounding everything around Josh Allen, and he's making more money even though he restructured and things like that. But that's a team that's kind of changing their pieces around Allen. And then New England's done some interesting things. I'm wondering if Brissett ultimately isn't the guy for them early on in 2024. So we'll have to see how the Jets' schedule plays out. But I think there's a chance here for the Jets to catch up on everybody inside the division. I think they're already past New England, okay? That's where I'm at. Miami has been a playoff team the last 2 years. I think they're going to be hard-pressed to equal the kind of success they had last season. And Buffalo's changing. They're still going to be good. You got Josh Allen. But I think the Jets should be right there with anybody inside the division.
I totally agree. And talk about departures, Gabe Davis now in Jacksonville.
Right.
So it'd be, if Jacksonville really does re-sign Ridley, it'd be Ridley, Davis, and Christian Kirk with Trevor Lawrence, which is a pretty good receiving room right there. But I agree with you in terms of the division. You take a look at what happens. Like, the Dolphins lost a lot of players, a lot of really good key contributors
Yeah,
for that
Hunt
team.
along that offensive line. We were talking about Hunt there at the beginning of free agency. He signed a monster deal with Carolina, 5 years, $100 million.
Yeah, and first of all, Andrew Van Ginkel, I think, has been an underrated player
Love
for
him.
them.
Love him.
He's a great last name, too. And I don't know if you ever seen
I don't
Ace Ventura?
like Dolphins, but I like watching them play.
Have you ever seen Ace Ventura?
Yes.
So, like, I don't know if there was a Ginkel and Einhorn shirt in Miami while Andrew Van Ginkel was there, but that, if not, was a missed opportunity. Anyway, the Patriots, I think one of the bigger things that the Patriots did, we didn't talk about, they re-signed Michael Owenu,
Yep.
who a lot of people thought would have been a top-paid guard/tackle wherever he landed. He ends up back in New England. I think one of the teams that quietly the Jets play next year that has made some noise is Tennessee. They signed Tony Pollard. They signed Lloyd Cushenberry, the center. Highest center signing bonus in center market history, I believe.
Yeah.
Someone put that out there. They signed Chidobe Awuzie, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Kenneth Murray. Like, they were active yesterday. I'm
Who's
not
playing
saying
quarterback?
that's a question. Is it Will Levis? And the thing for me that Brian Callahan, the coach, Bill Callahan, the offensive line coach, you know they're going to want to build the O-line. Titans picked 7th overall. They drafted Peter Skoronski last year. They now have Lloyd Cushenberry. They're at 7 overall. Is that a team that the Jets in their mock draft scenarios are circling and saying, are they going to draft a guy that potentially the Jets are interested in up front? Or are they going to want to add someone on the outside with Traylon Burks?
Yeah, you mentioned Callahan. I mean, just a fantastic line coach, one of the best in the history of this game with Dante Scarnecchia. So we got to close here. Jets going to come to an agreement with a tackle today? What's your prediction? I'm not even saying who it is.
Right, a tackle?
Yeah, a
yeah.
tackle.
Why not? Let's do it because today that gives me till 11:59 p.m. So I might be waking up tomorrow morning to some Twitter notifications saying, you know what, the Jets signed a guy. I'm just making sure that nothing happened here because no. 49ers signed Greg Odom or George Odom. I almost said Greg Odom.
Okay, so as of right now, 128 on Tuesday, you got Tyron Smith still out there, Jonah Williams, Bakhtiari.
Yep. I mean, Trent Brown's available. It depends what you view Andres Pete as. He's played both positions in the past.
Bakhtiari, of course.
So-
Trent Brown, yep.
Charles Leno, they're options. We'll see what happens. That's not everyone who's available. That's just who's available. And just like yesterday, it was prefaced by saying, don't go too far from your computers. One, because the notifications keep Twitter, keep X open. But two, as things start to happen, you never know when
Just
we're going to fire it
remember,
up.
it's been 7 moves since Sunday. 7.
Still more to come. Thanks for watching One Jets Live at One Jets Drive. We got to go get some lunch.